Lynched on CTV, proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88 at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled. Good evening. Imagine being lonely, homeless, jobless and angry at the world. Well, sadly, that's a reality for many living in this city. Tonight, Christchurch City Missioner Michael Gorman tells me why he's our guest tonight. Thanks for your time tonight. Well, if you have lived in the city all your life, you would have heard of the City Mission. How could you not? But chances are you would have never stepped inside, unless, of course, you're one of the good sorts who have been a volunteer. But just imagine feeling lonely and empty and hopeless and cut off from the rest of the world, really. Well, thank goodness for this organisation led by Michael Gorman, the Christchurch City Missioner, who joins me. And good evening to you.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for your time. First question, the earthquakes. How much of a problem were they for homeless in Christchurch?
They affected the homeless just as much as they affected everybody else. The world was shaking. These people, even though they didn't have assets, they may not have been worried about losing houses. They were worried about losing the familiar places for them. They were worried about their friends. They were worried about would their next earthquake hit very soon. They shared the same sort of worries we do.
And while some of them may not live in houses, I mean, some obviously, congregate in places like Latimer Square, it must have been quite traumatic for them, many of them with drug and alcohol issues themselves, and being in unfamiliar circumstances, being in unfamiliar areas. That must have been very trying for the volunteers there.
Oh, it was. But, some of the clients that we had coped beautifully. I was walking home to my house to see if everything was all right, and I passed this intersection and the traffic was moving really smoothly, which it wasn't in most intersections. And I looked up to see who was directing it, and it was one of my clients whose life is absolutely in chaos. He can't sort of manage to get through the day, but he rose to the challenge brilliantly and he was directing the traffic.
Do you think, in a perverse way, perhaps the earthquakes may have helped some of the clientele, or not?
I don't think so in the end. I think that they are scarred with the anxieties and the experiences that the rest of us are. We're never going to be the same. I think with the earthquake there were winners and losers really, and so I think the clients that we deal with are no different. Some will be a bit better off. They may have decided to change their way of living as a result of the earthquake, but for others it's just the same as it was yesterday, but with more anxiety.
Michael Gorman, it is so easy for us to judge homeless people. It really is. You're on the coalface, you see them every day. You know their background, their lifestyle choices, how they end up at the mission. Is there a similar story that you hear when a client comes to require the services of the mission?
Well, I always look at the situation as being one of luck. I've been incredibly lucky in my life. I've had parents who loved me. They insisted I went to school. They always were able to provide for me with food. I then got an education which meant that I'd get a reasonable job. That's not true for everyone. And I think a common theme is that people choose, I think, the good, but we see the good differently. You and I would see the good quite differently from somebody gripped in alcohol. So they will choose to have a drink because it eases the pain for them. You and I know that's not a good choice, but for them, it's the best choice they can make. They have a limited range of choices. We have an enormous range of choices because we're educated, because we've got a bit of money, or we've got the possibility of getting some money. We've got a house to live in. But if you don't have that, your range of choice is much more limited. So you're choosing not between good and bad, but you're choosing between bad and awful. And so if there's a common theme, I think that for me it would be a lack of luck. We can make our own luck, and we can make advantages from it. I mean, like, I'm not saying that people can't improve their life situation, because they can. But the odds of them doing it have to be stacked against them if they start from a situation of poverty. And if that's compounded by mental illness, and if that's compounded by a lack of education.
I want to talk to you about the sense of hope that I suppose in your line of work, Michael, you have to have. I know quite a few social workers myself, and they say one of the hardest departments, if you like, at the hospital or so forth, is working with homeless, working with, you know, drug addicts, working with people where they see there is no hope because they don't feel they're making a difference, because all they're doing is being caretakers in the interim before they go out and see John or Sally do it all over again. So how do you remain optimistic? And do you have hope in the homeless? And do you ever see a positive outcome? Or is that just not the line of work you're in?
We have a saying
or service,
at the
so to
mission
speak.
that we hold hope for people till they're strong enough to hold it for themselves. What we mean by that, I suppose, is that we put people in a situation where we provide as much as we can for them. Some do succeed, and that's a wee bit of a negative as well, because if a few succeed, society tends to say, oh, so-and-so managed to get out of the poverty trap, why can't you? Whereas a lot of people can't. The odds are too stacked against them. But I have hope. I have hope that the community of Christchurch will find it in their hearts to care for these people, that they won't marginalise them even more. Sometimes they aren't that attractive. They're difficult to love. But I think we have to do that. And that's where my hope comes from. It doesn't necessarily come from will people change and make a success of their lives as we see success. It really comes from, are they managing to have a life that is a little better than it was before we intervened with them?
I want to talk to you later in the program about how Christchurch residents can actually help the people that we speak about. But perhaps another class of people that may have been unknown to the mission, say 5-10 years ago, are the working poor. Describe to me who the working poor are, because you're getting, if I can be bold to say this, a slightly different clientele now, aren't you?
Absolutely.
And a really concerning clientele. What is or who are the working poor in Christchurch?
They're different people. Like, funnily enough, they can be people whose parents may have died and left them a house. So you'd think, oh, that's good, they're not poor. But they're on a benefit. They can't afford to pay the remaining mortgage repayments, or they can't afford to carry out the repairs to make sure the house is properly insured. Some of our people have mental illnesses, which mean they don't have the energy to be able to look after their house. So they are, in fact, they might have jobs, but they are almost crippled by advantage. That sounds silly, but just because they've got a house, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to cope.
I think we need to talk more about the working poor, because that's a major concern, Michael Gorman. We've got people who are working, but they're still poor. We need to take a break. Let's discuss more on the working poor next here on Lynched. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Christchurch City Missioner Michael Gorman. Michael, before the break we were discussing the working poor. It concerns me that we have people who are working in full-time employment in some cases, but they're still dirt poor. Has it got worse in the last 10 years? Because some of the recent studies, including that of the Salvation Army, came out recently and said the gap between rich and poor is getting worse. Do you buy into that?
Oh, absolutely. In the past, if you were poor, you still sort of managed, but now it's becoming increasingly difficult.
Now, why is that? Can we blame the earthquakes, or is it more than that?
No, it's more about society. We're a low-wage economy with high prices for goods, and so you can buy a lot of rubbish cheaply enough, but if you want to have healthy food, you have to pay for it, and rent. I mean, in Christchurch, rent is just appalling. It's a scandal. You
think the rent prices are a scandal in the city?
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of people who are very sincere and very good, and I think and landlords, So I'm not knocking that. I think there are some very good landlords, but there are also some scurrilous landlords who are charging exploitive prices for very inadequate places.
I completely agree with you. How do we change that, Michael? I know this for a fact. I was trying to find a one-bedroom place for myself around the city. Everyone goes on and would call me up on talkback and say, "Oh, Chris, what are you moaning about? Look on Show Me, there's heaps of properties." Yes, there are, but if they're affordable is another argument. What are you seeing in all of this?
Well, we see people who were in flats and then the house is going to be done up, so they have to be evicted. The house is done up, and then because it's looking good, the rent is put up, and these people who left it can't afford to go back into it. So you're getting people who are being displaced. And that isn't just a matter of finding another place to live, but if you've got children, for example, you have to worry about their schooling. Where do you take them to school? If you're in employment, how do you get to work? Can you afford to pay for your car, or can you afford the buses?
See, the problem is, though, Michael, it's a catch-22, isn't it? Because on one hand, we want the rebuild of the city to progress, right? So we're calling out for migrant workers to come to the city. We're calling out for, apparently, beneficiaries from Auckland to come down where the work is plentiful. That may be true, but where are they supposed to stay? Because the rebuild workers, in the end up competing for houses for Christchurch residents. And then we have a vicious cycle of more poverty, don't we? Yes, so it's a catch-22.
Yeah, and we also have people coming to help rebuild the city who bring with them their own problems. Like, just because you were a drug addict in a foreign country, you come to Christchurch to help with the rebuild, but you bring your addiction with you. We're already dealing with people who have come to so-called Help Christchurch, who are now in need of our services. And so I think that we haven't been careful enough about the people we've encouraged. We haven't been realistic enough to talk about the work that they will need to do and the qualifications or the skills they'll need to have.
That must put so much pressure on the mission. Not only are you trying to cater for local residents, but occasionally you'll see those who haven't been properly screened by various agencies. They come down where they can smell the money and it doesn't happen. But as you say, they're already... How do we screen them better to ensure that they're up to the task by not putting extra pressure on you guys?
Yeah, it's a wee bit out of my field how we would screen them. I suppose all I'm sort of doing is saying that we should, in some way, not place them in a worse condition. There was a family who came from one of the Eastern European countries, and they were here not very long with their handicapped son when the parents' marriage broke up. The father vanished, and about 3 weeks later the mother was told she had terminal cancer.
Oh.
So now what you're left with is this woman who will die very soon with a 13-year-old handicapped son in a foreign country. And who's going to be responsible for them?
Well, who will be responsible for them?
I don't know. We'll do what we can, but it's that particular problem is one well outside our ability to cope with.
And yet you've been left with this.
Well, you know, the mission, Sir Gill Simpson called the mission the last bus stop. That's where people who have fallen through the cracks of lots of other services end up. And that's true. And we are able to provide, first of all, a sense of belonging for them. There are some people, you know, who consider the city mission as their family. Now, that is really wonderful and lovely, but it's incredibly sad that they would think of a social agency as being their family. We try to do that. We try to give them a sense of belonging, a sense of well-being. So we have a women's day centre and a men's day centre if they wish to go to those. And we provide emergency accommodation in terms of both the women's and the men's night shelters. But in the end, these people have to be given the ability to cope with for themselves. We can't let them be dependent on us forever. And they don't want to be dependent on us. They want to contribute, or most of them. They're always going to be bludgers. But not as many as people might think. And they want to get on with their lives. They want to live a life of dignity. They want work, but not at all costs. Who wants to work for a pittance? The value of work doesn't come from doing it. It comes from the reward that you're given and the value that's placed on your work.
And it's fair to say that comes from money. And isn't it sad that you're right, we do live in a low-wage economy, and I get frustrated when I hear about how things like convention centres and stadiums are going to bring the cash to Christchurch. It's an absolute lie. They do not bring in the cash, as you probably know. They create low-wage jobs, but they don't bring in the amount of money. Yes, occasionally they might, but we're talking about stadiums and convention centres. They are loss-making facilities. And that's the sad thing, and they create low-wage jobs. But how do we change that? How do we create an economy that pays okay?
Oh dear.
No pressure, Michael.
I should be the Minister of Finance.
Really?
No, I shouldn't.
We'll try and answer, we're going to take a break, we'll try and answer some of those questions. But I think what's very important for the viewers at home tonight is to also talk about some of the other good work you do. You're not just an emergency accommodation provider, but the mission does some fantastic work. More on that next. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched on ZB. My guest tonight is the Christchurch City Missioner, Michael Gorman. Michael, in terms of the services the mission provides, it's not just emergency accommodation, and I think that's really important to say this if people are considering donating, because you guys do extraordinary work across the board. You are a social service agency in a way. What else do you do?
Well, we have the women's night shelter and the men's night shelter, as you've mentioned, and also the food bank, in which we think we touch the lives of about 25,000 people a year. We also have a budget advice service. We have a men's day centre and a women's day centre. We have quite an extensive alcohol and drug service, so that we have a residence for 10 people who are doing what we call social detox. That's not sort of having a great party. It's more about not having medical. It's more about having medical. You don't have you've done a medical detox. Then you come to us to, I guess, get your life into gear, so that you can work through the chaos in your life. You can get better sleeping patterns. You can plan your next move to sobriety. And so it's really important for people to have a safe place to do that. We also have 7 drug and alcohol counsellors, 1 for youth and others for adults. And we have a women's drug and alcohol service as well. We have home detox nurses who will come into your home and help you detox. Wow. And that's really good service because...
Are these all volunteers?
No. No, I have a paid staff of 64.
I was going to say you'll need...
Exactly.
Yeah.
34 of those are full-time staff and the others are part-time. And we also have 170 volunteers. We always need volunteers. We need them for special projects sometimes, but we also need them for the day-to-day stuff.
I was going to ask about that, because all very well saying come along, help with Christmas lunch, but it's more than that. You need volunteers across the board every day, don't you?
Yes, we do. We have a couple who come every weekday for nothing, drive our van around town doing work for us. We have another woman who comes to the food bank every working day, and she just does this as a gift to us. Then we have other people who cook in the night shelters. We have people who come to the residence, the drug and alcohol residence, and do awful things like make beds and clean rooms and things like that as well.
Come to my place if I like.
Yeah, mine too.
In terms of the food banks, we were saying off here, you do see a different clientele now as well, with those needing just the basic foods.
Yes, we do.
That's scary, isn't it?
Yeah. People are struggling. And it used to be that most of the people we saw would be people who were on benefits. That's not the case anymore. It's that working poor we talked about before. People who are in low-paid work, who might also be in part-time work, and often that's not counted in the unemployment statistic, and so they really fall through the gaps. And so we're able to help them with food parcels. We try to keep our food parcels nutritious, except at Christmas time we go mad then. And
put in a couple of Mara bars?
Oh, absolutely. But basically we do try to keep them healthy and sustaining, and give vegetables as well. Is
it hard to get the food through, or do you find that people by and large in Christchurch are pretty good?
People are absolutely great. That's one of the best things of my job, is the goodness of people. So we do get a lot of food. We're always on the lookout for more. I sort of feel like the ghost at the wedding that nobody wants to talk to.
Why? Because you're always demanding something from someone.
I'm always asking.
But that's your job though, isn't it?
It is. And the need is great. And, you know, you can ask for things for other people. And so I unashamedly do.
And you can do that right now because you're in the sort of an appeal stage, aren't you, with fundraising, for example. Tell us about that.
Yes. We have to raise 5.2 million a year to keep us going. And so we do all sorts of things. We have the Swass. Johnny Swass is a wonderful man. We have his luncheon once a year. And our latest venture is the return of Robbie Deans to New Zealand.
Yes.
And so on next Thursday, at St Margaret's College at 7:30, Robbie's going to be there with lots of other ex and current famous footballers.
Yeah.
And Robbie's going to answer questions and talk. He's a great supporter of the mission.
Now this will be, I reckon this will sell out, but tickets are still available, aren't they, for this amazing event? How can people...
They go to Event Finder.
Eventfinder.co.nz.
And then work through the process.
Come through the details.
Yes.
That is, what a nice chap to do this too.
He's great. Before he went to Australia on his venture there, we were building our new building, and his farewell was put on with the proceeds to the mission as well. So it's sort of nice to complete that circle, really.
That is nice. In terms of, I can't believe I'm going to say this, and it makes me feel unclean talking about Christmas, but I mean, the reality is people are starting to prepare for Christmas now, and of course the mission is now preparing for Christmas. That has got to be a stressful time for many people, including your volunteers, I'd imagine.
Yeah. God help us, we started preparing in April, so don't feel too bad.
Really? And I thought Farmers with its Christmas decorations was bad.
Yeah. But we try to provide a Christmas lunch for about between 600 and 700 people. We never know how many, and we don't particularly want to know. We like the idea that people will come if they want to. The only criteria to come to the mission for Christmas lunch is, do you want to? Because I think that anyone who wants to come to the mission for their Christmas lunch without family support may be really lonely and may need to come. So we hope they do. We hope that anyone who wants to come, who needs to come, comes. And so that's obviously on Christmas Day at Christchurch East School in Gloucester Street.
You want to make this the biggest Christmas
Well, we love
lunch.
Christmas. It's great. It's a time of celebration in a world where celebration isn't that common for a lot of the people we deal with. So we try to make it as happy, as flamboyant, as exciting as possible.
Well, I think you always achieve that because whenever I see, you know, on the news, Christmas Day, it always features the mission, and I'm always astounded by just how happy it does look. But in order to generate that happiness, you still need donations. So here's your chance now, free plug, Michael, it's all yours. You're not afraid of asking for help, I know that. But people watching the show right now, how can they donate? What do you need?
Right, at Christmas time we will need chickens, we will need hams, we will need pavlovas, fruit salad, sweets, soft drinks, the Christmas fare, the sort of thing you might have at your own home, Christmas puddings. And we'll need them to start coming in sort of mid-December, sort of December the 13th, 14th, 15th on. I always panic. Every year I go into panic mode.
Do you? Why?
I'm sure there isn't going to be enough.
Yeah.
You know, and then will people come? You know, I'm like the adolescent with the party. You know, I think, oh God, this is going to be terrible. No one's going to turn up.
Start having the old wine before they even turn up.
Well, don't do that.
Listen, we're out of time. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm grateful you come on the program tonight. And thank you on behalf of those who do have trouble in Christchurch. The mission is an incredible place, and it's a sad, and I feel fortunate I've never had to go there. There are many, as I say, in the city that are less fortunate, and thank you for your service.
Thank you for my wonderful staff.
And your staff.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. I've enjoyed it.
I've had a really good time. Thank you as well. That is the Christchurch City Missionary, everybody, Michael Gorman. That is our show. Thank you so much for joining me. Join me on Newstalk ZB tomorrow. Christchurch Mealy and Dalzell is the guest. But from me and all the CTV team, good night. Lynched on CTV was proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88, at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled.